2 o'clock. So this West Berkshire local plan examination hearing session will resume. There's some people here this afternoon that weren't here this morning, so I'll go through some opening announcements. I won't say quite as much as I said this morning, you'll be pleased to know, but I'll just need to cover some stuff. So I'm William Fieldhouse, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the West Berkshire local plan. Can you all hear me okay? The microphones are working, they're pretty effective, but do please, when you speak, make sure it's close enough to you and at the right height so that it picks up, because some people are here having a bit of a problem hearing, particularly when there's a bit of noise outside. So please try and ensure that. A reminder also, please, to switch off your mobile phones, laptops, other devices, or at least to silent mode. Water's been provided and refilled, so that's good. So please don't bring any food or hot drinks into this room. Toilets are down in the basement, so you have to go out of the door or that door along to the end of the corridor there, and there's a lift in the corner which takes you down to the basement level. No fire alarm tests are planned for this afternoon. So if the alarm does sound, we need to go out of the door around and then out into the front of the building to the tennis court, which I've not actually seen the tennis court, but presumably it'll be apparent once we get out there. Ian Kemp, the programme officer, is around this afternoon, so if anybody has got anything that they wish to raise about the proceedings, have a word with him when you get a chance. So this afternoon we're dealing with matter 2, the amount of development needed in the district, and including initially the plan period, which I'll say a few words about in a minute. We'll probably have a break around 3:15, 3:30 for 20 minutes or so. We'll aim to finish before 5 o'clock. It may well be a bit earlier than that, depending on how much you've got to say to me. Just a reminder for those that weren't here this morning, that the purpose of the examination is to help me decide if the plan is legally compliant and sound, and if not, how it could be modified to ensure that it is. So this session, like the others, will take the form of a structured discussion of the issues set out on the agenda that was published a week or so ago. I'll start each agenda item with some questions to the council, and when we've heard the responses to those, I'll invite contributions from others. If you wish to speak, just please put your nameplate up on end and I'll bring you in at an appropriate time. And when I invite you to speak, please turn your microphone on and speak into it, as I say, and then turn it off when you've finished. If you could please try and make sure your nameplates are sort of pointing towards me, so that I can see them, and preferably not hidden behind bottles, although I appreciate that might be a bit difficult. I will go around the table in a minute and let everyone, thank you. I will let everyone introduce themselves in turn. A quick word again about modifications for those that weren't here this morning. The council obviously has proposed some modifications to the plan in response to my questions that I've published at various times. And to catalogue all of that, a comprehensive schedule of all of the proposed modifications was published last Thursday, 1st of May, and that's exam 23. So hopefully you've got that. It's not so much this week, but when we get to subsequent matters, when we're looking at the detail of policies and allocations, we'll need to obviously look at the plan as submitted, as well as the council's proposed modifications to it. So each of the modification will be discussed at the relevant hearing session, and you'll have a chance to comment on them. There were some things this morning that I gave an initial indication that I may need a bit of work doing by the council. I didn't make any definitive announcements about that this morning. I will make that clear probably tomorrow morning. I might just outline it, and then, as I've said previously, I'll do a note after the end of each week of hearing sessions to be published, which will set out the things that I'm asking for the council or others to do. So that's just the procedural introductions. We'll turn to the agenda in a minute, but before I do, can we go around the table and let everyone introduce themselves, just say your name and briefly who you're representing. So if I could start with the council, please.
Emmeline Lambert, Council Instructor for West Berkshire District Council.
Good afternoon, Nick Ireland. I'm a director at ICINI Projects. We worked with the council on the housing needs assessment update.
Good afternoon, I'm Lila Bassett from West Berkshire Council.
Shukri Masuri, West Berkshire Council Planning Officer.
Good afternoon, Richard Naylor, Gladman Developments.
Good afternoon. For this session, Simon Pike, individual representative.
Jonathan Walton, Opus Works, representing Newbury and Crookham Golf Club and Calcutta Park Golf Club.
Afternoon, sir. Phil Robinson from Pegasus, representing Walker Logistics.
John Litton, King's Counsel, representing Walker Logistics.
Owen Jones, excuse me, Owen Jones appearing on behalf of Hallam Land Management.
Good afternoon, James Isles, Provision with colleagues Gareth Johns and Catherine Miles, representing various interests.
Lisa Probin from Dark Cliff Homes.
Connor Sheffield, Stantec, on behalf of Copus Farms.
Mark Parent, Home Builders Federation.
Sarah Dutfield Turley on behalf of Panettone.
Tim Burden Turley on behalf of Donington New Homes.
Matthew Spryer from Lichfields on behalf of the North East Thatcham Partnership.
Mary Cook from Town Legal on behalf of Pinson's Lane.
Mike Burkin, Town, on behalf of Pinson's Lane.
Roger Tustane, Nexus Planning, on behalf of Crowdace Homes.
Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Alan Dival, Director at Walsingham Planning, and we're acting on behalf of Colthrop Village Consortium, who are a consortium of landowners who control a mission site to the south of Thatcham. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there's two participants on the agenda not here, but I assume they're not attending. Right, okay, thank you for that. Everyone's microphones seem to be working okay. So before we look at the sort of the quantitative needs assessment and requirements in the plan relating to the three different types of development, I'm going to just deal with the issue of the plan period. I published a note IN 11 on the 15th of April, where I made it clear I hadn't yet finally decided how the plan period needs to be modified. However, NPPF expects plans to look ahead at least 15 years from adoption. And the most up-to-date assessment of local housing need at the time the plan was submitted related to 2023. And the council has published housing land supply information also relating to 2023 now. So for those reasons, I asked the council to prepare potential modifications to the plan so that it covered the period 2023 to 2041 on the basis that 2023 was the sort of up-to-date base date for which the evidence information was available for needs and supply, at least for housing, and 2041 was based on the anticipated 15 years from anticipated date of adoption. So we'll deal with, the council's potential modifications to SP12 relating to housing set out in exam 2022 and presumably in exam 2023 cover that period. So we've got that information. So we'll discuss the revised requirement figures shortly, and we'll discuss the implications for the housing and land supply at future sessions. But in terms, so we've got the position from the Council on Housing, but if I were to conclude that the planned period were modified to 2023 to 2041, which other parts of the plan would also need modifications that haven't yet been put forward? Who am I looking to respond? I mean, the obvious one seemed to me to be the things we're going to be talking about this afternoon, i.e. the land requirements for offices and the land requirements for industry warehousing, because they're quantitative elements that are based on particular start and finish dates. So would that be the case? I'm looking to the council, someone from the council to confirm that.
So yes, it would be largely the housing supply, but also gypsy and travellers.
Gypsies and travellers, and also the office.
Sorry, and employment.
Yeah. So in terms of the calculate, we'll come on to the detail of what it means, but the calculation of, we've got the calculation of housing needs factored forward to cover that period. In terms of the calculation of the need for office space and industrial warehouse space, I think there's a methodology that you can change, you can use to prorata it to a different period. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, so we'll deal with that when we come to those issues. And so thank you for the Gypsy and Traveller assessment as well. Is there anything else in the plan that is time dependent to those precise dates? I don't think there is, but I may be wrong. We've talked about transport evidence and that dates for that, but
I think otherwise that's it.
yeah, okay. Right, okay, thank you. And just to be clear that looking ahead 15 years from adoption, obviously it requires you and me to anticipate when the date of adoption would be. If we assume that this, obviously we've got these hearings programmed, if we were to assume that those are the hearings that are needed for me to examine this plan and I was to submit my report to you, say later this year or early 2025, what would be the, a reasonable assumption about adoption?
We updated our LDS earlier this year, so we now anticipate adoption in March 2025.
Okay, so 15 years from adoption would be, the 2041 date would be appropriate in terms of covering off that the 15
That's
year
correct,
period.
yes.
Yeah, okay, well, if anyone's got any comments about that, we can deal with that. In terms of like the evidence, we've talked about transport, we've talked about the evidence for housing need and therefore the requirements, and we'll talk about the office and industrial warehouse space. Is there any other evidence that's sort of time dependent? We've dealt with those things, or we will deal with those things. Is there anything else that?
That's everything.
Yeah, okay. We talked about the viability assessment and I was reassured this morning that your consultants did have a check over to see if there's anything significant that needed to be updated, not so much for the plan period, but for the assessment. Okay. Right, okay, so I haven't got any other comments from me to the council. Is there anything anybody else wishes to say about the plan period? I think there was general consensus that extending it to 2041 was the right thing to do. You haven't had a chance yet to comment on the latest modification, which is kind of prompted by me, starting the base date to 2023 rather than 2022. Any observations, comments about that anyone has? If not, we'll swiftly move on and look at the figures for those dates. No, okay, thank you. Everyone's gone sleepy in the summer, in the sunshine and the heat. Maybe this will wake you up then. Housing requirements. Right. It's not like the old days, is it, Mr. Spry? When we could spend weeks on this to see how long we can spend on it. Right. So the council's response to PQ 21 advised that the various options for housing growth were considered during the preparation of the plan, the highest being 692 dwellings, and we kind of covered off what that meant for the sustainability appraisal. And then the submitted plan policy, SB 12, includes a range from local housing need, calculated at that time was 513, to I think what in summary was local housing need plus 5%, which added up to which was 538. And the 5% was to provide a degree of flexibility and to boost to the supply, while also taking account of constraints across the districts. That was the council's position on that. So your Matter 7 statement supersedes your Matter 2 statement because it changes the position. That's correct, isn't it? In certain respects. So this now proposes a modification, delete reference to a range entirely, but rather express the minimum housing requirement in the plan as a single figure. So that's where we've got to, which simplifies things for me. And you say that the figure should be 515, which is local housing needs calculated at the point the plan was submitted for examination, which is what the PPG asks you to do to update it then. And that becomes the figure. And then you say that the requirement figure, the minimum requirement figure is that, and that's what the council will seek to meet. Okay, you're nodding, so that's good. So we're going to deal with housing land supply and the subsequent issues. We're not going to deal with that today. But we do know that we've got the supply information up to 1st of April 2023. Yeah, so we can work out what the supply information is. But in terms of the requirement figure, the total would be a minimum requirement of 9270. Yeah, for the plan period 23 to 2041. Yeah, and that's the 515. Okay, so that's where we've got to from the council's point of view. But the NPPF 66 states that the housing requirement figures should show the extent to which the district's identified housing need can be met over the plan period, which you say that's what it is, and any needs that cannot be met within neighbouring areas. So we come back to this 245 current figure floating around from Reading, which is going to change at some point, but at the moment that's what is agreed is an element of unmet need. So the reason justification in the plan, sorry, it's a figure of, is it 230? 230, yeah. Refers to that 230 figure. And that relates up to 2036 for Reading's unmet need, because that's the Reading plan, looks to 2036. So that's the figure. But leaving that aside, if you average it out over the period of 2023 to 2041 for West Berkshire, it would be around 13 a year. Is that right? So if you added that to the 515, you'd get a figure of 528 if you were meeting all of Reading's currently unmet need. So that's another possible figure which we can invite comments on. I know there's lots of other figures that have been suggested. So that would be, if I concluded that the plan should meet local housing need as a minimum requirement, it should also pick up the 230 from Reading. That would be a figure that I could logically say would be a reasonable figure.
I think if there was an unmet need, but we would argue that the situation has changed now. So I kind of draw your attention to it's the exam 7 and the letter from Bracknell Forest Council. And within that, it comments that the position in Reading has evolved due to a number of new factors, including higher densities being achieved than expected, the development of a new evidence base, and a focus on redeveloping central sites. And since we submitted the plan, Reading have published a Regulation 10 review document, and that outlines that policy H1 in their plan is now out of date, and that they've been able to meet their needs in full. And they're now undertaking a review of the local plan that's considering the standard method.
So just to be clear, Brackley Forest letter, referring to what you said, was that talking about in Reading?
It was, yes, Reading.
So, and Reading are also saying because of their supply situation changed.
That's right, and that's in their Regulation 10 document, but that was published after we submitted the plan.
Yes, okay. So what you're saying is, whilst the plan was submitted based on statements of common ground and the plan writing in that there is this unmet need from Reading, you're now saying the evidence has changed, so there isn't any more an unmet need. So the simple thing from your point of view is say, well, that's an issue for Reading to look at in its new plan, looking longer ahead, and that 230's gone away because of the supply situation, etc. So that's right. Mr. Ireland, you look like you want to.
So yes, that's exactly it. Since the submission of the plan, it's not that this council is saying, it's Reading itself, Reading Borough Council itself has undertaken a Regulation 10A review, the equivalent of a 5-year review, where it works through the policies in its plan and considers whether they're up to date or not in the situation regarding them. Now, what there was the equivalent of a 10 home a year deficit between the housing requirements and the need in that plan. And that's what generates the 230. But the supply position in Reading has changed. And so Reading's Reading's review now identifies that the OAN on which that plan was based, the objectively assessed need on which that plan was based over its plan period to 2036 will be met and exceeded within Reading. And indeed, it says that the housing target in the plan will be exceeded by 2,000 homes, which is clearly much greater than the 230 unmet need that was previously identified.
Sorry, okay, thank you very much for that clarification. So the implication of all that would be that if, I'm just flicking through now, but I don't know, I don't think you've proposed changes to the reason justification of the plan to remove this reference to Reading's unmet need, have you, or have I overlooked it?
Supporting text just mentions we work with authorities so there is an unmet need, but ultimately maybe after Reading have gone through their new housing requirements has been tested through their local plan. Obviously, we're required to do review every 5 years, so we can kind of consider that later on, and we're committed to an early review of our plan.
So, sorry, as submitted, there's references to Reading's unmet need being 230, so that would need to go out of the plan, wouldn't it? To avoid any confusion, wouldn't it? If I were to accept the modification that changed to SP12 to have a single figure that was 515, it would be simply justified in terms of that's local housing need for West Berkshire using the standard method, that's the requirement.
Yes.
And that's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right. I think we've dealt with this before, and I think you've explained that you have considered it, but obviously the PPG asks you to consider whether the housing requirement should be increased to allow more affordable homes to be delivered. I think it's undisputed that the requirements to deliver affordable housing as part of market-led developments in the plan and the percentage requirements in the policy won't deliver enough affordable housing. Affordable housing will be delivered in other ways and there'll be other issues, but the council did consider a higher figure. I think it may have been a point made this morning. Was that explicitly, or was that part of the reason for that to deliver more affordable homes?
Not particularly, it was more just to try and boost supply. But we've taken account of the representations made and we realise that actually expressing our requirement as a single figure is much more, it provides greater clarity.
Yeah, okay. But the effect of having a higher requirement figure in West Berkshire and increasing the supply to meet that in West Berkshire, given the state of the market, etc., would that be likely to lead to more development above local housing need? I mean, this is speculation to some extent, but but based on, and would it be likely to deliver more affordable homes?
So yeah, yes, I mean the council recognises there is logically there is a relationship between the two, but in the circumstances where we are now, we feel that the best way of boosting affordable housing in the short to medium term is to get a plan in place as soon as possible, and so adopting the plan as quickly as possible will achieve that in allowing the sites which are in that plan, providing planning certainty, allowing the sites within that plan to come forwards. And so the council's view is that that's the most effective way of boosting affordable delivery in the short to medium term.
Because of the new, we're going to talk about the affordable housing requirements at the end of the day, but that being because they are new requirements that would apply to all the sites, whereas at the moment they're not getting affordable housing provision. Is that why? Or it'll just
no, not specifically. It's that I suppose you typically see a growth in housing delivery immediately after the adoption of a plan, because it provides certainty for people to bring forward applications and develop those sites, and therefore a boost to delivery in the short to medium term is best achieved by getting a plan in place as quickly as possible.
Yes, that's clear. An endorsement of the plan-led system. Right. Okay. Anything else to the council? I think, we've established the council position clearly, what it suggests it needs to be done to make the plan sound in this regard. So obviously, many of you could have prepared a different plan with a different assessment of need, or the same assessment of need, but a different requirement in it. And, alternatives that may be quite reasonable have been put forward. But the question is the approach now described by the council a sound approach? Does anyone wish to comment on that? HBF.
Microphones. Thank you, sir. I think in terms of the comments, I agree with the council in terms of the extended plan period and with regard to the not looking at a range. I think in terms of the range, I don't think actually putting a 5% additional in terms of the requirement would necessarily be unsound with regard to that. I think in terms of what PPG states in terms of an increase in the total housing figures, including the plan, may need to be considered where it helped deliver required and more affordable homes. I think that's an important recognition and actually can be included within the could be included within the requirement. So I don't think in terms of that 5% addition, or as we suggest, a 10% increase in terms of that, which has been tested through the SA. I think Appendix 5, Table 2.1 sets that out as being a sustainable approach to delivering to development in the area. I think, as the council noted, yes, getting a plan in place is a way of boosting supply, but actually getting a plan in place that actually boosts supply beyond what the minimum required by the standard method would actually deliver and help deliver more affordable housing. I'm not saying that there won't be a plan in place. It'll be a plan in place that delivers more. So, whilst I recognise what the council is saying, it doesn't negate the need to actually go further and beyond that in terms of either as a requirement, but also I think in terms of supply. And I think that we come to that later, and I think that's difficult in terms of looking at the buffer, where the council are now in terms of supply and where they'll be in future in terms of what's needed, given that we now see a plan that doesn't necessarily meet needs over the plan period, over the amended plan period, on the basis of what the council have set out in their evidence base. So I think we'll probably come back to it. But I think in terms of the requirement, I think having a requirement wouldn't have been unsound, but equally recognise that where the council are with regard to the 515, but definitely support the plan period. But I think there will need to be look in terms of what those supply are and actually ensuring that plan meets those needs and that there is sufficient flexibility within that supply to ensure those needs are met. So whilst we're talking about the requirements at the moment, I think it inevitably moves towards supply in terms of whether the council is sound in terms of meeting that requirement as set out in the various evidence that's been supported in terms of your additional questions, sir.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think I understand the point. The requirement is a minimum requirement and it's based on the standard method. The more fundamental point, I think, is ensuring you've got adequate supply to meet that. And that doesn't necessarily add to the requirement, but it means looking at the supply side of the equation to see, well, how do you actually achieve 515 per year or 9720 over the plan period? How much land do you need and what assumptions do you make, etc.
Correct, sir. If it was, you could have added an affordable addition to for affordability if you chose to do it. I don't think that'd be unsound, but I think in terms of looking to boost supply and meet those needs, it is about the buffer and supply side rather than necessarily just about the requirement. Thank you, sir.
And the way that policy SB 12 is written, I mean, there's different ways you can do this. As modified, it says provision will be made for at least, so that's a minimum requirement, I suppose, 9270 net additional, so it's net additional homes for the plan period. So I think that's pretty clear that it's a minimum figure and provision will be made for at least that. So what the plan's saying is that it will seek, presumably the plan will seek to make that provision, and the council will in other ways as well. Okay, well, we'll come on to supply on another day. But let's see if anyone's got any other comments about the housing requirements. Mary Cook.
Thank you very much, sir. Can I just come back on the 230 dwellings point? Because you will recall in our, there are two things really, but in our representations, one of the things that we were focusing on was very much that the provision of housing in Reading was dominated by flats, and that one of the issues, it wasn't just a numbers, it was also a qualitative point. And if we're going to take the 1st of April 2023 as the base date, I'm quickly looking at the Reading Reg 10A statement, and I'm going to ask you to look at that. And I'm struggling to see the over provision that has been identified. What is clear is that moving forward, their housing figure under the standard method is obviously going to be a lot higher than it was under their local plan. But the other point I want to make is that it's also clear from the monitoring data, and they're talking about monitoring data to the 31st of March 2022, but I'm going to invite you to look at paragraph 3.355. I don't mean right now, but the point is that in 3.55 and the next one, 3.356, they say that only 18% of the supply was 3-bedroom homes or more, whereas their 2016 SHMA was looking for 50% 3-bed or more. So there's still a significant shortfall in terms of family accommodation in Reading.
And that comes back to Tilehurst's location, etc. Yeah, understood. I mean, okay, and yeah, understand. I think rather than that being a quantified housing requirement issue for this plan, it's an issue about the spatial strategy, is it not? And future assessments of what Reading can deliver and what its needs are.
Yes, but I also take your point, sir, that you can't have as currently the case, and I don't know why, if the council are now relying on this, they haven't actually proposed modifications to the lowercase text to remove the point about the unmet need, and also to explain more clearly that actually looking forward, Reading will have a significantly higher figure. I suspect one of the reasons they didn't want to change their text is because it does leave them in a slight quandary about what they say about the future.
Well, what does this plan need to say about the future of Reading's future local plan and future unmet needs? If it's not addressing it,
well, as things currently stand, it is the case that there is an adopted plan, and it is the case that that adopted plan says that there's a shortfall.
Understood. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Turley.
Thank you, sir. Just a related point regarding Reading, and I'm not sure if through you, sir, I can ask Mr. Ireland about the OAN number, because obviously Reading has the 35% over an uplift, and I don't know if that's been taken into account in these numbers. I've not seen it written anywhere. Whether that obviously stays in future, we don't know, but that has significant bearings on Reading's ability to meet its housing needs.
Yeah, I don't want to get distracted by what future issues there's going to be. Clearly, from what you're telling me, and Reading is going to have to work out what its need is in the future, both for and types of accommodation and quantity of homes. And there's going to be issues of looking at how much is unmet in Reading and where it needs to be done. So that's all things understood. But
I suppose a slight point back on that, so is that is a current challenge of Reading. Reading has always historically been able to demonstrate a 5-year housing and supply, and I speak as an ex-planning officer at Reading. They've struggled over the last few years because of the 35% uplift. So this isn't something necessarily to push down. That even this small number will make a notable contribution moving forward.
So you're saying that even though there isn't evidence to demonstrate what the current need is, unmet need from Reading is, everyone knows it's going to be substantial, and therefore this plan should do something now if it can. Okay, understood. Thank you. HBF again. Yeah.
So I suppose it was just really with regards to Reading in terms of the only position we have now in terms of the adopted plan is the 230 shortfall. Obviously, everything else still needs to be tested in terms of what can be delivered and what's deliverable. So it's, whilst the council are looking to prepare a new plan, that's at the early stages. We don't know what's going to happen. So the only point at which we can look at is the adopted plan, and not any other elements, because that needs to be tested at examination, go through. So I think it's just really that point that made that's the only point that we actually know about is the 230. It could be higher, it may not be there. And I think it's well, I suppose it's when Reading aren't here to potentially to sort of set out that case there, but there is an unmet need that's identified, it's in the plan, and I think that's where that's the only position we know. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think I've got the point. It's yes, understood. Yeah, Opus Works.
Sorry to bore you with Reading, but it's I'm dealing with a number of the sites in Reading at this moment in time. Reading's bringing forward updated housing need figures as we speak, and they're quite imminent. And what we do know is that that as Mary and as others said, the acute need is going to be for family housing, the very stuff that can't be delivered in Reading. The reason I mention this is I'm here as well and representing Calcutta Park Golf Club, which has put in planning application to West Berkshire. And at this moment in time, because of the way the neighbourhood plan is being put together and local green space allocation being placed right over the top of potentially where that housing is going, there's active blocking going on. So whether it's within here where you have the local plan, which is not allocating sites within the most sustainable areas because they're within the settlement boundaries, and then dropping it down to the local plan, we can't have a position where you could either be meeting the shortfall of Reading, or you could be better meeting West Park's own requirements, but that is being determined by what is local politics. Now, the reason I do mention that, there's been 2 legal letters gone into West Berkshire over a 2-year period, and we're still yet to get a reply. And in terms of conformity, you set the agenda and others have to follow. So it's quite important, because it's not just about this plan, it's also about how you potentially meet what is actually going to be a very acute need based on the OAN and based on the numbers that Reading's churning out and cannot meet by its flats.
Sorry, what you're saying the role of this plan should be in terms of dealing with that?
I'm saying that in terms of meeting unmet need, there is a discussion that should be held with Reading. Their numbers are coming forward. The 230 is very likely to go up, and it's all very likely to be dealing with larger family houses, the sort of stuff that Reading cannot deliver. And actually, West Berkshire is in a better position to deliver in places like Tilehurst. And that's why it's important to factor that in.
But isn't that an issue that will need to be addressed? And it'll be addressed through Reading doing its plan and West Berkshire reviewing this plan, using the duty to cooperate or whatever else we have, to sort that out in the future.
Well, as both are going forward at the same time, it seems a very good time to cooperate.
Well, this plan's at a late stage in preparation. You're telling me the Reading plan's at an early stage, so it's.
But the housing need data, as I say, is imminent, and therefore it would be a missed opportunity to not consider that and to take that to a later stage, because everything will be out of kilter in that regard. I mean, the benefit, the purpose of all plans is to lock. You don't do housing market areas anymore, but it's not to deliver something that doesn't work for Reading and also something that doesn't work for West Berkshire, if you can actually get the 2 things to work together.
Okay, thank you. Dartcliffe Holmes.
Thank you. I think the point that we're all trying to make is that we've got a local plan here that was supposed to account for the unmet needs that Reading previously declared. Things have moved on. So I think in January this year, they said that their requirement was now 877 dwellings per annum, compared to the previous one, which was 689. So again, serious shortfalls, they're highly constrained and nothing's been done. They're just kicking it into the long grass. Surely we should be taking this opportunity to addressing this now.
Well, okay, understood. Yes, or the alternative is it's addressed through the plan making process by the local authorities responsible for making their plans, Reading and West Berkshire, not in this plan because this is at a late stage, but in the future review of the plan.
But it seems that nobody's actually picking up this shortfall. So we've had other neighbouring authorities who've just ignored it as well.
Sorry,
I was just saying that we've had other authorities who've moved through the local plan process who haven't addressed this shortfall, and it's not getting picked up.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, Litchfields.
Thank you. So I think on the issue of unmet needs, like sort of nailing jelly to a wall, isn't it? Because it's never sort of entirely set in terms of what the number is. But as I understand the council's position, is they're sort of praying in aid of what's emerging as a potential future outcome from a future local plan that has not yet been evidenced or tested. In fact, there's only actually consultation on options up to January. We don't know whether the unmet need from Reading in future will be less than the 230 or the same or more. You know, we literally don't know that at the moment. And part of the reason, and it's a point alluded to by Ms. Cook, which is essentially it's around the mix of housing as well that's involved in setting a housing requirement. So Reading, for example, will need to grapple with its local housing need figure. It will need to grapple with the fact that includes 35% uplift, but it will also have to grapple with para 63 of the framework, which requires policies to address the needs of different groups in the community, including affordable housing, families of children, older people, students, people with disabilities, etc., etc., etc. Only when that whole process has gone through will Reading know whether they need to set a housing need figure in the round and a housing requirement figure at a certain level. That may still generate unmet need for West Berkshire to deal with. There could be more or less, and that need, if it exists now. So the best proxy measure we have for the level of unmet need that's on the table is the 230. That is from an adopted plan that Reading has, and it's the basis on which the council has been working with all the way through. The final point is that going to the housing topic paper that the council was relying upon, apologies, I don't have the document reference, but the January 23 paper, there was a series of other factors that were taken into account as to why the council was going for a housing requirement figure slightly above the minimum number. So that included the MPPF requirement, and sorry, the references at para 227 or 2.27, sorry. So that included the MPPF objective to boost the supply of housing above the minimum requirement in the existing core strategy, which was 525. Reference to OAN sensitivity testing, although that was superseded, it remains a consideration. The need for flexibility to the impact of annual changes to the LHN, and the need for flexibility to allow for phasing issues and for an element of non-delivery. So there was a basket of measures that were informing going for a housing requirement figure just above that minimum starting point. And I don't think we've really heard a compelling case for why the council should have diverted from that. The point that is made is, well, if you had to increase it, that would delay the provision of affordable housing and housing delivery. Why? That's an assertion rather than anything that's been evidenced. There are sites on the table. There is, I'm not going to get into site specifics, but North East Atcham, if this scale of that was increased, there is land available that could be factored in to the land supply without causing any significant delay to the plan, and certainly not to act as an obstacle to its adoption by the timetable that the council had envisaged for next year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Understood. Hallam Land Management.
Thank you, sir. I sense we've exhausted the Reading question. So I'd like to go back to the issue of affordable housing, if I may. And the question that you posed the participants was in relation to soundness. And we could have prepared a different plan, which would be sound alongside the plan that the council has prepared, which is sound. And that goes to the heart of the question of soundness, because it's fair to say that there are various shades of soundness. It's a judgment based on the different tests, whether the plan is positively prepared, whether it's effective, and whether it's justified. If I turn up the opening section of the local plan, where it talks about strategic objectives, it says that the strategic objectives are the key delivery outcomes for the local plan review, rather that the local plan should achieve. And the second of those is housing. And it says that the district housing needs are to be met. And it goes on and talks about market and affordable housing, and it talks about different other types of housing. In your opening remarks on affordable housing, sir, you said that it was undisputed that more housing overall would deliver more affordable housing. I think that's what you said.
No, I don't think I said that. I said I think it was undisputed that the policy requirements in the plan wouldn't deliver enough affordable homes against needs based on the proportions of market.
Yeah, it's undisputed that there will be a shortfall on the basis of the policies. And you then, I believe, said, went on and said if there was a higher figure, it would deliver more affordable homes. And you put that question.
That was the question.
Yes, you put that, Mr. Question, to I.
If you had a higher requirement, would you get more affordable homes?
Yes, if there was a higher requirement, would it deliver more affordable homes? And Mr. Ireland's answer was yes. He then went on to qualify that by saying, but our objective is to adopt a plan in the shortest period of time possible. Don't deny that's an objective, but is it the objectives that the council have set themselves at the outset of the plan? Is it an objective that delivers the housing needs of the district? My submission, so that isn't the outcome of what's been talked about here. And that when you look across the tests of soundness as a whole, that does lead you towards increasing the housing requirement. Thank you, sir.
Okay, and from your point of view, from a market perspective or whatever, if you had more private sector housing schemes because there was more supply in the plan, there is a market to deliver more than local housing need, i.e. more than 515 per year.
Yes.
And those schemes would deliver the proportion of affordable housing that the plan requires.
Yes, I don't think anybody's putting the notion here that achieving that higher figure wouldn't be possible by allocating more housing land. I think that the delivery rates, I think someone in their hearing statement have set out recent delivery rates overall in terms of market provision, which shows that the market can absorb that, and with the policy being applied, it would achieve more affordable housing.
So the maths would lead to more market housing leads more.
Yes, as night follows day, yes. Yeah.
Okay, understood. Right, thank you. Okay, anything else? Anybody else wish to say about the housing requirement and the proposed modification? I understand the points made that, well, the submitted plan has a higher figure, and that's, you know, to change that, does it have to be unsound to change it? And I'll need to think about that. I also understand, and I think we've exhausted, as was said, the Reading unmet need figure. So unless there's anything else, anybody else wishes to say, anything council wishes to respond to?
So maybe briefly, that's okay. Yeah. So in terms of the Reading position, we are measuring the 230 figure is based on Reading's 2019 local plan. So that was based on a housing need of 699 a year and a requirement of, I think, 689 a year. But so obviously that was the supply position when that plan was developed, which was, well, if it was adopted in 2019, a couple of years or so before that. The simple point about this is that Reading's supply position has improved since, and they're now saying that over that plan period, that the supply will exceed the 699 requirement by about 2,000 homes. So put simply, that there isn't an unmet need anymore. There isn't a shortfall comparing the supply with the need in that plan, and that's probably why Reading aren't here this week. We then had some points really about the plan review for Reading that's being undertaken at the moment, and I think as you've heard around the room, Reading's looking at what the housing need is. It's looking at its supply, but we're just not in a position where West Berkshire knows the answers to those questions about whether there'll be a shortfall, as probably does anybody else here. And then I think just on the mix points, and in terms of what the nature of what's being delivered in Reading, I think there is just a point about geography here, in that Reading's borough boundary doesn't extend across the whole of the urban area. It spreads out partly into West Berkshire, but particularly into Wokingham, and there are two major strategic development locations within Wokingham Borough that really relate quite closely to the Reading urban area, which are focused on delivering family housing. So I think you do get a slightly different position if you look at the Reading's administrative area relative to the more functional based geography in those terms.
Okay, thank you. Right. that finishes all that I need to deal with on housing requirements. And so we finished on that. So what I suggest, excuse me, what I suggest we do now is have a break for 15 minutes and come back and do the employment land. Those who are not interested in office or industrial warehouse developments are free to leave if they wish. I know some of you who are more interested in that have been sitting patiently waiting for this part of the agenda. So we'll have a break there. As I say, if you want to leave, you can. If you want to stay, you're very welcome, even if you won't have anything to contribute. So I'll leave it at that. So if we could reconvene, actually, we'll come back at 3:10. That's just under 20 minutes. Thank you. Okay, it is 10 minutes past 3, so we will resume on the next agenda item, which is about the office floor space requirement, which is referred to in the paragraph 7.4 of the plan. There's been a net increase in floor space of 50,816 square metres to 2039. And the council's response to PQ 20 indicates that this would need to be modified to reflect the proposed modification to policy SP 20 to look ahead to 2041. And then so the figure was based on projected labour demand derived from sectoral economic forecasts from Experian, adjusted to take account of the standard method local housing needs, so the population growth that would arise from that. And that the Experian model was higher than the Cambridge econometrics model. And also past trends had shown a loss of office floor space, and therefore the council wished to take a positive approach. So it went for the higher projection based on the economic forecasts. Okay, so that was done. And then I think you've now crunched the numbers to change the floor to the plan period to 2041. So you've looked ahead, and that comes up with a figure of around 60,000. For sake of argument, 60,000 square metres. But that presumably was still from 2022. Is that right? And it would be easy enough to adjust it if we said the base date was. You've heard. I think you were here. From the discussion about the plan period.
I wasn't so, but I am aware that you might be changing the base date. So you're right, the document you've got has a 2022 date running up to 41. But it wouldn't be a major change to reduce that by 1 year.
Because they're done on an annualised basis or whatever. Okay, thank you. And in terms of based on the base forecast that I referred to, the Experian and the Cambridge econometrics models and looking at past trends, that sort of foundation, if you like, you're happy that that's reasonably up to date and reliable as reliable as economic forecasts ever are.
Yes, it's as up to date as we can make it. We can update it forever. So I think it's proportionate for where we need to be at the moment.
And the conversion of those forecasts to floor space requirements is done on using data relevant to this area in terms of job densities and land take and those sort of things, yeah?
Yeah, the assumptions have all been checked as we go along. It is fair to say that, especially for offices, we're still on essentially a pre-COVID employment density. So we're still using around 1 to 12 square metres ahead and projecting that forwards. There is a lot of uncertainty about post-COVID office working, home working, etc. I have yet to see a robust evidence-based approach to reduce that. So we've carried on with that method, with that caveat that it is a pre-COVID assumption, and as such, it needs treating with significant care going forwards.
Does that mean that it's likely to be on the higher side than the lower side?
Yes, it's much more likely to be on the high side rather than the low side, because the impact of home working was already in train before COVID, but essentially COVID has supercharged home working, shall we say, and it makes what assumption anybody makes about home working is quite a significant mathematical impact, because it relates to the stock of floor space as opposed to the change. So if we make a tiny adjustment to how the existing stock is used, it can have quite a large quantitative adjustment. So we accept that the number is on the positive side. We advise any client dealing with offices and plans at the moment that there's an unusual amount of risk and uncertainty. But that uncertainty is one where the demand is more likely to fall rather than increase.
Just going back to the point you make about stock, I think I understand it. So if you've got 10% of employees working at home and that changes to 15%, and that applies to all of the existing jobs, not just the net additional increase, suddenly you've got too much floor space already without having needing any more.
Exactly.
That's the point, yeah.
It isn't just about the net change.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
makes a big difference to the stock. And there is, as of yet, looking forward over a long plan period, there is still a lot of uncertainty about how that will play out. Because, for example, it may be that we continue to return to the workplace and we move back into positive growth again. The plan in calculating its need has taken the positive side, recognising that there is a big downside risk on that.
Okay, and in terms of the trends that it has been shown of a loss of office floor space, presumably for conversion to higher value residential through PD rights and that trend kind of reinforces the need for still a positive approach, notwithstanding the potential impacts of COVID, because is the market analysis that there's still a shortage of office floor space in West Berkshire?
The market in the short term, when we did our market facing consultation, the agents were concerned that PDR had been stripping out the stock at a faster rate than businesses would have done otherwise if planning control had been in place. They were concerned at the rate of that loss and therefore asked us in any other adjustments, or in our mind, we bore that in mind and took a positive view elsewhere. Now, as far as PDR losses go, we do hope that the major losses have worked their way through by now. We've had PDR in place for a good number of years now. The really easy win schemes that could have been easily and readily converted generally have been. But again, it's a PDR, so it's out of our control. So we want to remain positive and try to keep the plan on a positive spin, identifying a positive supply wherever we can. But it is obviously difficult at the moment, but taking a positive plan-led approach gives us that flexibility looking forwards.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. So subject to an adjustment to take a year's requirement off, and we move the base date to 2023, it's something around 60,000, a bit less. And that's still the council's position for the reasons that you've explained, the need to have a positive approach. We'll come on to the supply side of things later, so we're not going to talk about that today, but I think the basic point is there isn't an identified supply of land to accommodate, this 60,000 square metres from the council's point of view, in terms of being suitable and deliverable. But we'll deal with all that on another day. But the starting point that I think we can either agree or disagree about is the 60,000 or thereabouts over that planned period. Okay, thank you. Well, let me deal with office first. And then we'll come on to industrial warehouse, the same sort of questions. So anything else about office floor space that you want to say before I see if anyone else has got anything? I think there was general agreement that it should be extended to 2041. Anything else that anybody wishes to say on office floor space? No objection. So if the plan were modified to deal with the plan period 2023, 2041, it would include the figure of 60,000 or thereabouts. That's okay, no dispute about that. Right, thank you. So the background's the same to the industrial and warehouse floor space. I think you say that you looked at those two uses together because the nature of the market in West Berkshire is that it's hard to distinguish, and yes.
Where we can distinguish, like from economic forecasts, we've tried to separate out the industrial components versus the logistics components. But a lot of the space on our existing sites and a lot of the space that's been permitted over recent years is more mixed in nature. I know we'll come on to logistics later, but we're not traditionally a large logistics location.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was going to ask you about that. And the figure, the 91,000 figure in the plan, and that would, to look ahead to 2041, that would be 104,000 or thereabouts, to looking ahead to 2041. And that again is basically, you had Experian, you had Cambridge Econometrics, and you had past trends, and you took the higher of those figures, which was the past trends one in this case. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's worth just noting that because informing our view about how to provide for the industrial market, the agents' feedback was that the market was quite hot. It had been running possibly undersupplied for a few years. So if you notice from our tables, we make quite a large adjustment on top of need, which is called the stock vacancy adjustment, which works out in this case about 50,000 square metres. So 50% of the total plan period need. Now that's an adjustment that we make to reflect the fact that the current vacancy rate in the stock is far lower than we would like for a functioning market. It suggests that we need some more flexibility injecting into the market. So we add on top of the past trends, this 40-odd thousand, to bring the stock vacancy back up to a 7-8% from an almost zero at the moment. So it is.
That's just simple maths then. So you've done the past trends.
Yeah.
And again, it's back to the difference between the overall supply, the low vacancy rate in that. If you assume that goes up to 7 or 8%, which is market normal or whatever.
Yeah. It's essentially because we recognise that the market at the moment may not be in balance. The vacancy rate is too low and agents tell us that they would have liked some more space in the past. So that's one way to address that. So essentially the main approach is a past trend, the positive past trends approach, plus an adjustment on top to allow a bit more flexibility into the market and allow it to function more efficiently.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Yes, so that's done on the past trends, but you also checked it against the Experian and the Cambridge econometrics. So is there anything about market signals about, you know, what's nationally an increasing demand for these large scale logistics type uses? That would not be reflected in any of those approaches, the figures in any of those approaches, is that true?
Yeah, there's no manual adjustment to delve into the data and increase it to take into account footloose sub-regional logistics. If we had been delivering that in the past, it would be in our past trend data, it would be carried forwards.
Yeah.
It isn't in this case. So we have carried forward all of our past trend data. So any warehouses we got delivered over that 12 years have been carried forwards. But you are correct, there's no additional adjustment. But the fact that we knew logistics when we were looking at this, which was in the middle of deep COVID, but when we were looking at it, we knew we had to take a positive view to the limit of our data and the limit of the evidence we had available at the time. Hence why when we looked at a range of data, we did go for the most optimistic that we could robustly evidence. If we were to make further adjustments, they'd be beyond what we could evidence to you and certainly beyond what we could have evidenced in 2022.
So in terms of the quantitative assessment of what that extra floor space could be, you couldn't do it, but is there anything about, you talked about it being probably a sub-regional market for that sort of thing? You're not in, well, you're obviously on the national road network. Is it not a bigger than sub-regional market, or is it because of, not so much?
We are, in terms of FEMAs, the council has always progressed and has an evidence base demonstrating that West Berkshire is its own functional economic market area. So that has always been the starting point for this. As far as sub-regional logistics go, the approach that we've taken, whatever sub-regional logistics need we met in the past is carried forward in our past trends. So we carry on business as usual in the past. So yeah, essentially whatever we'd attracted in the past, we continue. Now, we're quite clear in the report and the advice that unlike offices, the risk is the opposite way for logistics. What we have advised the council is always, I think it's picked up in statements here, that the need is a minimum need. If you have sustainable supply in addition, then our numbers shouldn't be a barrier to delivering that if it's sustainable, etc. looking forwards. So that isn't an issue, and we've always, because we are aware that the risk on the industrial side is the opposite way to the offices. We have always advised the council as far as we can to make our land allocations as quick win as we can do, on the assumption that if take up is faster than a per annum calculation, because our plan has to deal with the plan period, and we're not going to have uniform take up over any plan period. We're always going to have peaks and troughs. So when we've looked at sites, we've tried to advise the council to front load the sites as far as possible, so that if there is a risk to the plan and take up is faster, we can try to drag forward supply that otherwise per annum would have been assumed to have been taken up later down the plan. I know that that perfect narrative has been disrupted by the availability of supply here, but the logic that what supply the plan is able to put into the system, we make available as quickly as we can to manage that risk, I think is quite important.
So sorry, the 100,000 or whatever, what you're saying is that if you make suitable allocations that are achievable in the short to medium term, that could be taken up in 5, 6, 7 years rather than over 15 years. And if so, that then would be, you'd know that because, you know, you're monitoring the take up, and then that triggers a need for, you know, looking longer term for more sites if in the review of the plan.
So that we can top the supply up via a plan review if needs be. That would be the ideal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think that probably sets the scene for others to contribute. But basically, this council's position, I think, is that every suitable, available, deliverable site for B2, B8 is allocated. That's the council's position. That's correct. Others will have different views, but that's and if you thought there were more suitable and deliverable available sites, you'd be content for them to be allocated. It's not that you're wishing to constrain or not to meet the identified need. Okay, understood. That's helpful. Just one final sort of technical point. Unlike the housing requirement, these floor space requirements are described in the plan, but they're not in policy. Is that something that maybe the way the policies are structured, but it's just, you know, it's a point that's been made, and I think, you know, it's on the face of it, should it be given a greater status to try and achieve these things?
So yeah, the policy sets out that the identified need for employment lands will be accommodated over the plan period, and then within the supporting text, which should be read obviously in conjunction with the policy, the first paragraph it sets out the actual need figure and sets out the industrial as a minimum and the office as well. So then what we have in the first paragraph of the policy is that reference to facilitating the growth and forecasted change of the employment land to promote the identified shortfall, identified needs that we have outlined there. So the council is aware that obviously this has been raised in quite a few of the written statements. And we are also aware of other local plans that have the requirement within the supporting text, and most notably Bracknell, who's just had their plan adopted. And so we feel that this should be read in conjunction, but we are not adverse to putting it in. It's so we can make a main modification if the inspector would find that more appropriate.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, when I first read the policy SB20, you read it and it says you want to, you know, to facilitate growth and you want to promote the supply of office and industrial space to meet the identified shortfall, which I suppose is saying, well, you're doing all you can, but I mean, it doesn't say to meet the minimum requirement of X. It's sort of, it's lead the reader to think, well, hang on, what is the requirement and what's the shortfall? So
I think there's various iterations. We are happy to make an amendment to meet the identified needs, because in hindsight from reading the written statements, we feel that it should say to meet the identified needs. Now that we've made that additional modification to delete SP21, we've added in the text about site allocations. So we now feel that it doesn't read as it should do, and we need to amend that to say the identified needs.
Okay, so sorry, SB20 would be further modified to refer to meet the
identified need.
Identified need, not the identified shortfall.
Shortfall, yeah, because obviously we've had a main modification in the meantime, and I think feel like we need to correct that to make it read properly.
It would follow on logically, or it could follow on logically to say the identified need of, and just put the figures in.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. That's clear enough. Anything else you want to say before I open up for comments on the industrial and warehouse floor space requirement, knowing full well that there will be points to be made about the shortage of supply for another day. Yeah, Walker Logistics.
Thanks, sir. Yes, I'm very conscious that matter 11 will look at the, as it were, supply side of the equation. But my starting point, sir, is exam 2, which again is the council's responses to your preliminary questions. And at pages 91 through to 93, responding to your question 41, relating to how much net additional floor space, etc. A table was set out by the council referring to the earlier employment background paper EMP5. And then over the page, they make this good point, referring to the various allocations. They say that they provide an additional 68,781 square meters of floor space, but go on to make the point that policy ESA2, which is land west of Ramsey Road at Membury, has an existing planning permission. And so they go on to say that whilst the site, i.e. ESA2, remains an allocation, the associated supply is removed from the above figure to avoid double counting, resulting in a total supply from the identified allocations of 58,400. That's an important figure. And then that is reflected in their table on page 93, where they seek to identify what the shortfall is against the requirement of 91,109 square meters. And they identify that shortfall as being 32,709. In other words, it's 91,000 being the requirement minus the identified supply of 58,400. So that gives you the shortfall of 32,709. If you take that figure forward now to 2041, then the only figure that the identified supply stays the same, the 58,000. The requirement goes up per the council's table 2 in exam 11 to 103,000, and that gives you then a shortfall of 45,281 square meters of industrial floor space. So those are the figures you're working to. The point's been made just now that that figure, that requirement figure, is a minimum figure. It's not something just to be achieved, it's hopefully something to be exceeded. And so that shortfall of 45,281 is also a minimum figure. Now, I made the point earlier today, sir, I hope you'll forgive me if I make it again, but when you've got that sort of scale of shortfall, then a policy that leaves it to neighbourhood plans, uncertain in terms of their coverage of the district, uncertain in terms of when they are going to come forward, etc. It is not a sound policy to rely on neighbourhood plans to deliver the scale of shortfall that is identified and not in dispute in a sensible and district-wide basis. And so we will come, obviously, as a matter 11 in terms of the suitability of individual sites. But that is the problem that this council is facing in terms of its strategic policies. And I don't think there's any dispute, as to those figures. So it's a minimum shortfall of 45,281 that the council is looking for outside of the allocations that it's made already.
Okay, yes, I've got the points about, we'll talk about the wording of SB20 and neighbourhood plans, but I interpret it differently to you, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The point being for today, you're not disputing the assessment based on the evidence that Mr. Pestel has been describing about the need in the plan for the 91,000 square metres and this to be adjusted for the plan period to be 104,000 or whatever it is. Those figures you'd be fine with, and you can work out what the shortfall is depending on what you survey the supply is, but that you're content with the requirement assessment being a minimum.
Yeah, being a minimum, yes.
Yeah, okay. And obviously the point being, well, you need a supply to meet that. And so the dispute is around, are all suitable and available sites allocated? And I know that, you know, Walker Logistics and others say, no, they're not, because we've got some suitable and available and deliverable sites. That's we can. Okay, fine. Anything else from Stantec? Is there anything from your point of view on? I don't think there's any dispute about this requirement. So
no, I think you've effectively just covered off what I was about to say then, and no dispute. And yeah, I think the matters that we are particularly interested to cover will be covered in matter 11. So.
Well, just to, I mean, I can't remember what matter it is. I think someone said it was matter 11 when we come back to this. I mean, obviously, I didn't say this at the beginning, which I do normally do. I mean, usually when you examine plans, you examine the plan to see if it's sound, and I'd only start thinking about omission sites if I decided the plan wasn't sound, and I'd then ask the council to think about, well, how you rectify that problem. It's slightly different in this case because the council itself acknowledges that it's not meeting the needs for industrial and warehouse and indeed offices. Hence, one of the questions I did ask about, well, has the council allocated every suitable and available site? The council responded, yes, it was. Obviously, others, that gave them the opportunity to say, oh, no, you haven't, and this is our omission site, and explain why you think it is suitable and available. So in this particular instance, we will be looking at that issue when we come to it. So I suppose in a way, I'm forewarning the council to be clear about why, you know, the alternatives that have been put to you and being, you know, promoted here, you know, if is it still the council's position that they're not suitable, or that they may be suitable, but the harm is, you know, significant enough not to outweigh the benefit of going further towards meeting that need. So I just put that marker down for that.
So can I suggest this? I mean, really, they go hand in hand because if you've got an identified requirement, again, no one's disputing that, and you have, as in this case, a clear position whereby the council has not allocated enough sites to meet that need, it begs the question as to whether or not that policy is sound in itself. That's the nub of the issue. The question then is, how do we make it sound? And the answer to that is, are there other sites that would help to bridge that shortfall? And that's the matter 11 point.
Hence my question. Yes. Sorry. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Right. I think we know what we've set the scene, and we know what the discussion will be when we come back from matter 11 to talk about the sites that are allocated, but also thinking about, you know, whether more could be done to address the shortfall. Okay. So I think, you know, also the council, I think on the matter of expressing the requirement in the policy, I think you're saying you're comfortable with that if that's what I decide is necessary. Okay, so that does, I think, bring us to the end of the agenda items for today. Unless anyone's got any other points rising from.
Sorry, sir. Just one final point that we mentioned in our Reg 19 reps. It was about the 5-year supply review, 5-year review of the employment land. And just a couple of concerns as to whether there would be the new sites available to be able to meet that need at that 5-year period. We raised it in the Reg 19 reps, but I won't add any more now.
Sorry, what when you say the 5-year review, you mean?
So it's in paragraph, it's in the supporting text under policy SP20. The council suggests a 5-year review. I think it's paragraph 7.7 and 7.9. Related to the employment land provision. And as we stated in the Reg 19 reps, we'd had concerned over this approach as to whether there would be the new land available at that 5-year period that couldn't be identified now, which obviously we'll discuss as part of matter 11.
The point being that if there is land that's available, you should know about it now, not say that you'll find it in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. But so it doesn't alter the discussion we'll have under matter 11. but it also is reassuring, is it not, that the council's also committed to sort of saying, well, we'll look again within 5 years.
Yeah,
which they have to do anyway.
not completely ruling out, but the point being that if there are sites available now, should be allocated.
Yes, okay, I think it's the dispute is about whether they're suitable for allocation now or not, so we'll come back to that. Okay, any other final points? Okay, so thank you for your contributions today. Anything the council wants to say at the end of?
No, I just didn't know if you want me to come back on the neighbourhood plan element, or do you want to leave that for matter 11? But
on the neighbourhood plan?
Yeah, do you know that Pegasus was raising with regards to how that's interpreted, or do you want to leave it from 11, or do you want to draw a line under it?
Yeah, yes, you know, you may as well do it. We've had it mentioned twice. I've understood it. I know the point you're making. You can't rely on neighbourhood plans to make up the shortfall, which you're saying this, in effect, is what the policy is doing. Yeah, do you want to respond to that point?
I just wanted to come back really and say that that's not what the intention of that main modification is. And I think the main modification that was proposed was as a result of the proposal to delete SP 21 and SP 13, 14 and 15. And so it's to allow that neighbourhood plans could allocate employment sites should they wish to. We're not saying that they have to take on all the shortfall, and we're certainly not saying that they have to be strategic or anything like that in nature.
Nor is it the council's position that it's deciding not to allocate sites now because neighbourhood plans could. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, it's more to do with the suitability and availability of the sites.
It's just an acknowledgement of a fact that a neighbourhood plan could allocate a site, and that would be over and above whatever.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think we've heard enough on that one. Right. Okay, so we'll finish for today. There's a number of things that I think will become action points. I'll have a think about them the rest of today. I may just report back my thoughts just to be helpful to keep things moving tomorrow morning. But as I said, they'll be set out in a note, which will probably be published next week. So you'll be aware of what the 2 or 3 things are, I think. Okay, right. So we have finished in good time today. So enjoy the rest of the sunny afternoon, and I'll see some of you here tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thank you.